to the Near Memo with Mike Blumenthal and me, Greg Sterling. As always, we're here to entertain and provoke, which is what we'll be doing today. We'll be talking about the claim that Google Gemini has 350 million users, which I think is kind of BS. And we'll be talking about that. We'll talk a little bit about the conclusion of the Google Antitrust Remedies trial in the default search case and where that stands. And then we'll talk about Google's sort of attempt to leverage its moats of various sorts, platforms and software, a monopolistic position to transition to the next phase of this market, which is kind of an AI search hybrid. And what's the outlook for that? Shall I lead us in? Oh, and I have to thank our sponsor, of course, GatherUp. Thank you, GatherUp, for sponsoring this podcast and supporting us. Very much appreciate that. So let's jump into the discussion. So in the last week, I guess, was Google I/O, and Sundar Pichai, I think, made the statement, and it's been made elsewhere, that Gemini now has 350 million monthly active users, and their goal is at least 500 million by the end of the year. So it seems likely that they're on pace to hit that. But I kind of think that number is a BS number and not a real number. I mean, first of all, there's the sort of question of like monthly active user. And if you're a monthly user, are you really a user?
I'm a monthly Gemini user, and I go in once a month to see if it's gotten any good. It still hasn't. It's still very frustrating compared to ChatGPT. So I fall into that category. I don't know how many people are like me. I assume the rest of the world is like me, but they're probably not.
Well, I am probably a less frequent pure Gemini user than you are. I mean, I think that I used to use it kind of side by side with ChatGPT. Very occasionally, I'll go in and do deep research on Gemini. I think that's a decent experience, but otherwise, it has almost no utility for me versus ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity or even Grok. But so I think the monthly active user is kind of a dubious metric to use, although ChatGPT uses it. They claim to have 600 million monthly active users. But monthly is so infrequent and so casual as to be not really a user. Importantly, however, Google did not define what a user is, what constitutes a user. So what they're doing with Gemini is that they're jamming it everywhere they can. You know, it's in Google Workspace and Gmail. It's kind of now substantially the back end for the Google Assistant. It's, you know, showing up in various places in Android. They're using it obviously in search, AI mode, and AI overviews.
Is Ask Me Anything, Gemini, in Maps and these sort of specific?
Ask Maps about this place.
Ask Maps about this place.
The name is very awkward. I'm just struck by that. Ask me anything that you might want to ask about this place.
Right.
But
one assumes that that's a Gemini iteration as well, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
It's both big stuff like AI mode, and it's little stuff like knowledge graph inquiries. I mean, and if that's the case, then you're right. It's everywhere.
Right. I mean, I think that Gemini is the engine behind all of these different experiences. Instead of calling it AI mode, they should call it AI moat, because that's what they want it to be. Or something. A moat is a place that you can't cross or get bogged down in. Yeah. So they're pushing it everywhere they can. AI organized pages. What is that? That's a piece of, Gemini is sort of behind the scenes there. They have multiple AI brands, kind of, but I think at the bottom of it all is this Gemini core AI capability. And I think that's what is going on behind all of these different products. And of course, Gemini is now in Chrome, or is about to be in Chrome. So there's really no Google property, and it's also behind all their ads in some sense, some core.
They're adding it into Home. They're adding it obviously to Android. It's everywhere.
Right. Yeah, it's everywhere. So I think they can claim, because they did not define it as somebody who goes specifically to Gemini to do a query, I think they can claim that in all of these instances that's a user. They probably don't count every single encounter with a Gemini touch point as a user exactly, but I think that they're drawing a very expansive circle around all of these things and using that to get to the 350 million number. If you look at Fishkin published a report I think it was this week, pretty recently, with Datos, his data supplier called the State of Search Q1 2025 behaviors, trends, and clicks across the US and Europe. And I think it's only, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, it's only desktop data. There's no mobile data in here at all. Is that correct?
One of the concerns I have is that mobile use is different. It is just desktop data. That's all it is. And mobile usage is different. One presumes that that browser use is maybe similar to this, if not the same. But in the mobile world, there's much higher use of apps. When I need ChatGPT, I use an app. When I want Gemini, I use an app. And so this doesn't reflect that. It does reflect, huge dominance, stabilization of US searches per user and a dominance of those at Google. But as we've seen some percentage of these massive number of searches, Google is essentially creating an environment where they're generating their own searches, changing things that used to be not a search.
Right. They're generating more queries.
They're generating more queries by themselves.
Right. This is David's earlier piece about
right, and it's come up in other reporters. So it's just desktop. It's good data. It's interesting data. Google dominates. I think the big takeaway number from this research was that Google had maybe 4 times as much, 3 times, 5 times as much use as e-commerce sites, and perhaps got 20 times more use than AI tools.
Yeah.
Still.
So the reason I bring it up in the context of this discussion about the legitimacy of the Gemini user counts is that we'll include the link in the show notes, but there's a chart in here which shows DeepSeek, Copilot, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, and ChatGPT, with ChatGPT is the largest tool in terms of its usage, its adoption, and it's growing. There's a up and to the right growth curve that's not steep. It's not a 45-degree angle, but it's meaningful. And then clustered at the bottom in terms of adoption, you've got DeepSeek, Copilot, Gemini, Claude, and Perplexity. And DeepSeek had a spike when there was a lot of PR and hype around it, and now it's sort of gone down. Number 2, second after ChatGPT, is Gemini, but not by a ton. And clustered at the bottom are Copilot, Claude, and Perplexity. And the gap between ChatGPT and Gemini is quite substantial. And to me, we don't know what this means in terms of real numbers exactly. We could back into it. To me, this chart, which is also reflected in other data, suggests that in terms of real usage, there's a massive, massive gap between what's going on with ChatGPT and Gemini. I mean, there's a lot of developers using Gemini, and all of the stuff that Google is doing to push Gemini to its users juices those numbers. But I think the reality is that Gemini does have usage, and it's skewed toward Android. Android users use Gemini much more than iPhone users, iOS users. But that in reality, ChatGPT is used much, much more on the consumer side than Gemini. And Gemini, in my experience, and this is not based on any sort of systematic testing, but just my actual anecdotal usage over time, Gemini just is mediocre. It's, it can do certain things. It does certain things nicely. Deep research is nice. You can put a YouTube URL in there and it'll give you a quick summary. That's just drawing from the transcript that already exists, probably. There are a few things that it does nicely, but for the most part, it's just really substandard versus the others. Claude is better.
There was a good Washington Post article where they took the 5 leading AI chatbots, gave it 4 different types of writing, scientific, literature, and then had experts in the field analyze the results. It was just an interesting way of comparing them on a standard set of questions and quality outputs. I think Claude and ChatGPT were the leading products in most of those. Gemini, right. I think maybe won one category of those.
Yeah, I don't remember. Yeah, Claude came out on top overall. Gemini and Claude were close.
Or ChatGPT and Claude were close.
Gemini. I mean, that's right. Sorry, Gemini was not a winner overall. But I think the anecdotal consensus among people that I talk to and my own experience is that Gemini is not a great product. And you and I agree on that. Google is the extent, if Gemini existed as a standalone product, a standalone company like OpenAI, and did not have the benefit of Google's visibility, brand awareness, and reach, it would not be successful. It would not have anything like 350 million users. It would have a fraction of that.
Monthly users. We don't know what that means, but
Yeah, but I mean, whatever definition you want to use, it would not be where it is today. It is by virtue of the association with Google that it has that user base, and this is the thing that the Department of Justice is concerned about. So the Google Remedies trial and the Google Remedies portion of the antitrust trial, where Google is found to be a search monopoly, has just concluded. Google is asking for very light penalties, and the DOJ is asking for pretty substantial ones. I'll just rattle them off very quickly. This is not an exhaustive list. Everybody's aware that the government wants Google to sell Chrome or get rid of Chrome, ban on default search payment deals like the Apple Google deal, restrictions on tying search distribution to Google products, where Google requires somebody to make search, where Google is giving something to a third party and then search is a part of that, sort of a bundling of that, sharing of Google's index and data with rivals, choice screens, self-preferencing bans, and there's some restrictions on Gemini distribution. And the DOJ's post-trial brief said AI has now become sort of inextricably bound up with search. It's an access point for search. AI companies are integrating search, and they're trying to prevent Google from leveraging its search monopoly to gain AI, two things, to gain AI dominance and or using AI to maintain its search monopoly. So there's sort of a two-way street there. And this is precisely what Google is doing. Google is trying to move into, tie search and AI together in such a way that it maintains its current position in the market. And I think
and what's interesting to me is they have a lot of resources internally as part of this monopoly to bring to bear on achieving this sort of AI search monopoly. And unfortunately, the way our legal system works, they have a lot of time to do it, relatively a lot of time. They have roughly, 3 years, maybe 4 years. There's a settlement or there's a judicial ruling and then it goes back for appeals.
Right.
It could be years before, and then
right.
Change of administrations.
At least 2 years. At least
2 years, but maybe more. So they have 2 years to get Gemini
to keep doing the stuff that they're doing.
To keep doing it and to position them for a post DOJ world, a post, world in which they're competitive and financially able to retain their ad revenue and other revenues. So they have 2 years to get there.
So the judge during the trial didn't, I was obviously not in the courtroom. I was reading the coverage, and the judge sort of didn't betray a bias in one way or another. He asked a bunch of questions of both parties, the government and Google, but he did make this kind of provocative statement, where he asked, wouldn't selling Chrome, divesting Chrome be, quote, a little cleaner and a little bit more elegant, unquote, than some of the other remedies that have been proposed, like sharing the search index with rivals, which Google absolutely radically opposes, because then they're saying they're basically giving over their IP to the competition and other search data that would be related to that. And so I do think that he's going to come down, Judge Mehta, and is going to order the divestiture of Chrome. I do think that that's going to happen because it can be cleaved from Google pretty cleanly. Google, of course, would argue against that, but that's pretty significant from the standpoint of the clickstream data that Google's been mining from Chrome to improve search results. And also Google just put Gemini in Chrome, or at least they announced that. It hasn't shown up quite yet. So I think that's going to be...
saw recently with Facebook and Yandex, the ability to track users across the internet and identify who they are isn't limited to Google owning Chrome, right? So there's multiple ways for Google to achieve similar data understanding, and particularly if they can achieve a high penetration in AI and search and maps and products, then they will be able to see where people are going and get some idea how long they're there. I'm not sure if the cookie question plays into this, but they originally were going to get rid of cookies, but now they're not going to get rid of cookies, right? And one presumes that they may be able to track users even without Chrome.
Right. Well, there's all kinds of shady tracking methodologies, which
right. So it's
no
not clear to me
that,
I mean, Chrome's easy for them and the data is rich, but it's not clear to me that would stop their behaviors.
No, it definitely wouldn't. I mean, because they're committed to maximizing ad revenue at all costs by hook or by crook. And, unless they are prohibited by law and or civil litigation from doing a privacy violating kind of behavior, they will do it.
Right. So during these next 2 or 3 years, I see them as doubling down on all their advantages to make this AI search transition to a product, probably a consolidated product that isn't sort of bifurcated between search and AI, that takes people through the whole sort of high level to low level funnel, and then perhaps even helps them make the purchase. I mean, I think that's
For
their
sure.
goal. And the question is, how are they going to get there? And they're going to throw every piece of advantage they have into search, into AI, which means search is going to include AI evermore, obviously, but it's also going to include, as we're seeing, more local, more review content, more product content, all the stuff where they have advantages. They're going to bring that into search. And likewise, they're going to bring all of that into AI until such time as these two things are essentially functionally the same.
Right. I mean, everybody's sort of speculating that search in the future looks more like AI mode than AI overviews plus the
well, but like now, local is lame in AI mode, right? And so one presumes that they know what local needs to look like. They know it needs to include review stars and review counts and years in business and photographs and imagery.
some of those AI mode local searches do look like that. Do start to look like that. It started out with just mostly text, and then some links on the right hand side, and now they are putting these sort of carousels that are visual, that have that you see in conventional search, that have reviews, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, it's clearly in flux, but some of the pages that I've seen recently include a bunch of links and descriptions, and then images of the same places, those sort of horizontal array of images with review stars, and then more links, and then another kind of AI organized page style presentation where
but all the links go over to the knowledge graph, right? To the local profile.
They all load a knowledge graph, a sort of a dynamic knowledge graph that appears and disappears. And in a very small number of local searches that I have done, you do get direct individual website links on the right. But in most of these cases, what they're doing is they're just linking to their knowledge panels, GBP, and their knowledge panels. And there were just almost no, if not zero, individual website links. There's some directory links. So I do think we see an emerging, pretty decent local experience on the AI mode side, but it looks nothing like what we've got today in the traditional.
It'll be search. The other interesting thing, besides how much of their sort of unique assets they're going to bring into this battle, one of which we didn't talk about, which is the local guides and the local guide world, right? The local guides are this, gives their local knowledge graph a huge advantage. It gives maps a huge advantage because it keeps maps current, both in terms of places and roads. It keeps the local graph current with new businesses and information about hours. I mean, when, like I use Apple almost all the time, but when I have a doubt as to whether some place is open, I still go back over to Google Maps to double check that it's open or that it's there.
You make a so the latest AI overview kind of data on how many local guides there are is, and I don't know how many active local guides versus people who just have some sort of status as a local guide, is 150 million. So 150 million people around the world are fueling Google local data, are essentially their workers, their outsourced workforce, updating information, adding photographs, updating maps. I think this was Sochi data. I don't remember precisely. I do believe it was that they did an analysis, and it was a majority. I don't know what the precise number is without looking. It was a majority, and probably a substantial majority of reviews on Google come from local guides who are incentivized with levels and points to keep updating maps.
Yeah, that is one huge advantage. The effective outcome of that, an accurate map and an accurate business profile is another, which I think they're going to leverage. The question I have is, with all of that though, how do they've always had this deal with the world. We're going to scrape your traffic or scrape your content and send you traffic. does that deal just totally break down in this new reality?
Yes.
Where we're going to scrape your content and you can buy ads against your content? Is that the new quid pro quo?
Yes. I mean, the news publisher, there was a news publisher trade association which called AI mode a betrayal of that promise of that value exchange. To which, in the recent Verge interview, Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, said, I don't agree. We're still sending traffic. We will still send traffic to the open web. And this is something we're committed to. But clearly, it's not going to be what it was. And the levels of traffic are going to be diminished substantially from what they were.
Right. And in local, it doesn't matter so much, right? In local, whether somebody's doing a brand search to recover direction or recover a phone number, or whether they're doing...
Right. They just want the ultimate transaction.
They want the transaction, although...
Yeah.
It'll be... So local, it doesn't matter as much, but the outcomes are going to be the same. There's going to be less web traffic.
Well, you could argue that less traffic to, I mean, this is a point we can debate, that less traffic to a website creates a diminished local branding opportunity. If the person doesn't ever see your website, maybe they don't get your brand experience. There's sort of two parts to that. One is sort of awareness, and the other is some sort of brand experience, which can be defined.
Yeah, I mean, local is a very difficult place to achieve brand differentiation. Google's local results, very difficult place. Whereas YouTube is a good place to achieve brand differentiation, as is offline advertising.
Right. We'll be talking about that stuff with Morty Oberstein and
all that sort of stuff are opportunities which I think that everybody needs to be sort of testing all of these, testing YouTube, testing TikTok, testing off-site stuff, right, for brand.
So in the earlier newsletter this week on Tuesday, I did this kind of hasty thought experiment around sort of riffing off of the DOJ proposed divestiture remedies. What would happen if Google were forced to get rid of maps? And I sort of made the assumption that the maps and the local data were kind of unified there, and they would have to jettison all of that. You later pointed out to me in a different conversation that the local data and the maps are separate, of course. But let's just hypothetically say Google had to divest.
If you were the judge, you would have them split off.
Well, no, I did it as a thought experiment to show the importance, the strategic importance of local, not as a serious thing that Google has to get rid of maps. But if Google were to carve out maps and the local data from we would all see clearly how strategically important local is, because there would be almost no incentive to use Google other than to navigate to a particular URL. Because already the experience on ChatGPT, even with all the hallucination that's going on, or Perplexity, or some of these other sites, is a better experience than the pure search experience on Google. I mean, Google has this product graph and knowledge graph, and local in particular. If you were to get rid of local, you could go elsewhere for products. You could go elsewhere for whatever. I mean, ChatGPT for general knowledge is better than Google. We could argue about that for the score of last night's game, but otherwise it's better. Products, you can go to Amazon or elsewhere. And so local really is the key, in my view, the key strategic asset, and the local guides. So local guides, local data, and to a lesser extent, the maps interface is sort of the key strategic asset that Google has now versus, ChatGPT or Claude or somebody else.
I can't disagree with that. And YouTube is a huge asset on two grounds. Yes,
YouTube is a huge
One
asset.
is training. It has such a massive amount of language diversity, training, multimedia content, training, imagery, all that sort of stuff, and content. I was trying to change the head on my new weed whacker. I bought a new weed whacker.
Yes, that's very, very difficult, very vexing.
Well, and it wasn't working correctly. I tapped the thing, and the string wasn't coming out. Right. So I drove back, and I said, I'm a little intimidated.
You have to do it. You have to do it when it's going, I think.
I did it. It didn't work. So I drive back to the store to see if they, because I'm a little intimidated by putting the strings on these things and figuring them out with all the springs popping out stuff. And I said, I find this a little awkward. And it turned out that the head was broken. He gave me a new head. But he said, gee, when I need to figure out how to put the string on, I don't read the book, I go to YouTube. And this is the mechanic there, right?
Right. Well, that YouTube is a tremendous resource for all kinds of how-to content. And every brand in the world to the extent that they're listening right now, should dispense with manuals and just do how-to videos, explainer videos on YouTube, because no one cares about the fine print in 16 languages that you can't read. You go to
I had a
YouTube.
similar experience when I bought a mandolin. If you know what a mandolin is, a cooking cut,
as opposed to the
edges. As opposed to an instrument, but it's very sharp edges, very dangerous tool, but incredibly efficient. I was reading the instructions and it's like, what? And I went to YouTube and figured it out right away. But one of the questions I have, though, that this raises is YouTube is a search engine. YouTube, where Google controls all aspects of it, from the storage, the editing, the display, the distribution, the searching, all of it, right? They don't need websites to feed YouTube like they need websites to feed search.
Right.
I mean, to me, YouTube might be a better future search engine than search.
Well, for certain cases, absolutely. I mean, the problem with search right now is, if you have a question, if you have an informational question, this is an IRS form. What does it do? How do I take advantage of? Does the EV car rebate still exist? Whatever. There's a whole range of knowledge questions that Google now does a bad job of answering, because it has the AI overview, which is often incorrect or limited. And then it has a bunch of third-party sources, which are all jockeying for position and advantage and trying to capture your attention. And that information may or may not be good. I mean, and it's just much more efficient to use AI to answer informational queries right now. If I want a quick piece of information, if I want to find an article or some piece of news, I will use Perplexity. If I have a verbatim headline, or there's a document that I know exists, or if I'm navigating to a particular website, I use Google. But if I'm trying to find some piece of information, I said this I was on Blue Sky or LinkedIn with this, I don't remember. I was talking to somebody on a call. There was a company called Clickable that was a PPC management platform, and it was ahead of its time in some respects. And I knew the CEO's name, and I was trying to get the name of the company. I put in a very long query in Google, and I knew I had written an article about it. Google could not find anything. Didn't give me an answer. I did it in Perplexity. Boom, I got it right away. And so the thing that we think of as the search experience is now much better on other platforms than it is on Google, with certain limited exceptions.
Yes. And the long-term question is, will they be able to make a transition that's profitable and functional in this 2-3 year time frame before they have to sell, divest assets? And
well, I mean, if they're told to divest Chrome, as you point out, they'll appeal it. It'll go up to the Supreme Court, and that'll be 3 years or 3.5 years, and they'll do what they're going to do. I mean, Google has abandoned.
Yeah, it might run into the third Trump presidencies, for Christ's sake.
That's right, and the fourth. Google has abandoned its user-centric kind of mantra and is paying lip service to that. What it's really about is trying to protect its market share and trying to maximize ad revenue, because the user experience on Google now is just very mediocre, in my opinion.
So I think,
but let's say something positive before we end. What are you going to say?
I mean, it's an exciting time. I mean, and I think that it's an exciting time because it's clearly an inflection point. I think businesses need to stay nimble. They need to be testing and measuring everything offline and on. I think they need to stay in close touch with their customers to understand what their customers are doing.
Absolutely.
And I don't see this. I mean, I see Google as declining in importance over the next 5 years. I don't see them going away. And so I just think it's a very exciting time to be alive. I'm glad I'm alive during this period.
Yes.
How's that for positive?
Yes. Just to echo your final points, marketers really need to understand user behavior. Lots of user behavior has been assumed for a very long time. User behavior is complex. It varies by vertical, and people really need to invest in understanding that behavior. Where are their customers? What's the customer journey? You cannot make assumptions anymore about what people are doing online, because it's really diversifying quite a bit. And so thanks again to our sponsor, GatherUp, for supporting the podcast, and we will see you next week. Thanks for listening.